In 1908, the French financier and industrialist Albert Kahn launched what's arguably the most ambitious enterprise in the history of photography. Kahn recruited a team of photographers and sent them around the world to produce a snapshot of human life on Earth. Drawing on his immense private fortune, Kahn supplied his team with the most advanced photographic technology available. They were equipped with the autochrome, the world's first practical system capable of taking true color photographs. For more than 2 decades, Kahn dispatched his photographers around the world. They shot around 100 hours of film and an astonishing 72,000 autochromes. This vast treasury of images preserves fleeting moments from worlds that were about to disappear.
The preservation of the Kahn archive is something of a miracle.
They give an extraordinary immediacy to the beginning of the 20th century.
In more than 50 countries, Kahn's photographers documented the intimate details of everyday life. They saw people at work and at play. They recorded ancient rituals, as well as the forces of change that threatened their survival. And they witnessed some of the most momentous events of the age. Kahn's cameras were present at the fall of empires, the birth of nations, and the defining event of the era, Europe's traumatic descent into the bloodiest war the world had ever seen.
Here's a little boy holding on to his father for security in a world that was about to be blown apart.
The eyes we see in those photographs looking back on us, who knows how many of these people survived over the next few decades.
Albert Kahn's autochromes are the world's most important collection of early colour photographs. Together, these films and photographs cast new light on Palestine before the creation of Israel, Ireland in the twilight of British rule, India at the height of the Raj, the lives of women striving for independence, the children of Edwardian Europe, and the devastation of the First World War. They show everything from playtime in Oxford and performance in Cambodia to criminal justice Mongolian style. A century after Kahn embarked on this extraordinary enterprise, his pictures offer a unique insight into the formative years of the 20th century. These remarkable images are a window on the wonderful world of Albert Kahn. At the dawn of the 20th century, Paris was one of the most exciting cities on earth. For the citizens of the French capital, it was a time of great optimism, grand ideas, and global horizons.
It was the city of light. It was the centre of fashion, of consumption, as well as being, of course, the home of the artistic avant-garde.
It's the Belle Epoque. There's an abundance of intellectual and artistic activity in Europe, and a sense that anything's possible.
On the Paris Stock Exchange, fortunes were made by those who were daring enough to seize the golden opportunities of the age. One of the most successful was the French banker and businessman Albert Kahn.
The period in which Albert Kahn made his fortune was a period of accelerated, intense economic growth and intense globalization.
Kahn lived in a mansion shrouded by trees on an estate lying on the outskirts of Paris. There he lived a solitary life. He never married and left no children. Though he moved in the higher circles of the French elite, Kahn never acquired a wider public profile.
A man with this kind of wealth would usually make more of an impression on the public, but we can only conclude that Albert Kahn deliberately stayed behind the scenes.
In this rare piece of footage, Albert Kahn walks through his gardens. At the time, he was one of the richest men in Europe. But when he died in 1940, he was virtually penniless. Kahn's fortune had vanished, yet he still bequeathed something of incalculable value. A unique archive of 72,000 colour photographs, 4,000 black and white stills, and about 100 hours of film.
This particular archive tells an extraordinary story about a man who wanted to see the world, who wanted to understand it, who wanted to use modern, rational ways of thinking to bring about peace on a universal basis.
Albert Kahn was born in 1860 in the Alsace region of France, near its eastern border with Germany. His family was Jewish and of relatively modest means.
Most of the Jewish community of France lived in Alsace. Jews tended to be peddlers, they tended to be cattle merchants in the way that Kahn's father was, and they were also moneylenders.
After their crushing defeat in the Franco-Prussian War of 1871, France lost Alsace to Germany. Almost overnight, 1.5 million people were forced to choose between French or German nationality. Kahn's father opted to remain French.
France was seen as an emancipatory force, as a force for an egalitarianism in which people had the same chance for striving and success.
The young Kahn knew that he couldn't realize his ambitions in Alsace. As soon as he was old enough, he went to live in the Jewish quarter of Paris. He found work as a clerk in a private bank. By the age of 19, he changed his first name from Abraham to Albert.
Many French Jews coming from Alsace would be proud and patriotic Republicans. By keeping his last name, he was announcing he was Alsatian. By changing his first name, he was announcing he was French.
The world of the Third Republic, in which the Jewish community was deeply integrated, provided the perfect setting for the talents of Albert Kahn to flourish.
As a young trader on the financial markets, Kahn made several risky investments in foreign enterprises. But the deals paid off. He made a fortune from the diamond mines of South Africa.
This meant he had flair, a good eye for observing and analysing the markets, and quite a lot of sheer nerve.
He was the man with the capital, the go-between, the man who could prime pumps, the man who could set up deals, who could explore new frontiers.
By his mid-30s, Kahn was set to become one of the richest men in France. But as the 19th century drew to a close, Kahn had good reason to stay out of the limelight.
The fin de siècle was paradoxical, ambivalent. You can see it, quote, as the age of progress and technical innovation. But there's also a very dark side to the fin de siècle, which is anti-Semitism, a nationalism that's having an increasingly violent edge to it.
In the 1890s, France had been plunged into crisis by the wrongful imprisonment of the Jewish army officer Alfred Dreyfus on a trumped-up charge of spying. The Dreyfus affair uncovered deep-seated currents of anti-Semitism within the French military. The case undermined everything the French Republic supposedly stood for: the values of liberty, fraternity, and equality. Newspaper cartoons from the period show the virulent anti-Semitism that was unleashed by the affair. The controversy continued until Dreyfus was finally cleared of the charges in 1906.
The Dreyfus affair represented a significant threat to the stability of the Republic. The sudden emergence of this naked anti-Semitism was a deep shock.
Kahn was as shocked as everyone was at the injustice, but it was the attack on the Republic rather than the attack on Dreyfus which was most powerful.
Albert Kahn kept a low profile during the Dreyfus affair. But privately, he was developing a plan that could help overcome ethnic and racial conflicts and make the world a better place. He'd landscaped the grounds of his Paris estate by importing plants, soils, and ornaments from all over the world. His extensive Japanese gardens symbolize an internationalist outlook and cosmopolitan taste. But his worldliness didn't stop at the garden gate. As well as cultivating gardens, Kahn believed in cultivating young minds. Since 1898, he'd awarded generous travel grants to young people, mostly student teachers. The beneficiaries became members of Kahn's Around the World Society, and they met regularly at his estate. His generosity gave scores of young people from France, Britain, Japan, and the United States an opportunity to experience other cultures. Kahn knew the value of this because he was an intrepid world traveler himself. In the 1890s, he'd added to his fortune during visits to another distant market, Japan.
He was always looking for the edge, looking for that slightly riskier loan, but one with the high returns. And given the political situation, that was exactly the situation with the Japanese loans.
Kahn had made strong contacts among Japan's business elite, including the ambassador to Paris, Motono Ichiro.
The relationship between my grandfather Ichiro and Albert Kahn was very powerful. I think that my grandfather's politics was one of opening up the country. He had a universal vision of the world, and he shared this in his relationship with Albert Kahn.
Mr. Motono still remembers being photographed as a child during visits to Kahn's holiday home in the south of France.
We went nearly every winter. It was really a garden full of flowers. The smell of the flowers was always in the air. I saw Albert Kahn sometimes when he was there. Physically, he wasn't very tall. He was medium height, always dressed in black. He used to be alone, looking out at sea, in meditation.
Through his relationship with Motono Ichiro and other Japanese dignitaries, he put together deals which were of very considerable size.
Kahn maintained close relationships with his Japanese associates throughout his life. In the 1920s, a camera glimpsed him in the company of members of the Japanese royal family. Such alliances enabled Kahn to strengthen his global financial empire.
Kahn believed that international capital, international finance, was a force for improving the world, for modernizing the world, and especially that when it was complemented by philanthropic work, that it could be a real force for moral good.
The 1900 World Fair held in Paris seemed to epitomize everything Kahn believed in. The fair celebrated global commerce and international cooperation, and it saluted progress in science and technology at a time when French inventors led the world.
1900 had, as it were, a feel of infinite possibility. Science was there for mankind to benefit from it.
New machines capable of capturing reality would also capture the imagination of Albert Kahn. In 1895, the French inventors Auguste and Louis Lumière devised a way to record and project moving images onto a screen. Their invention astounded the world and made them famous as the fathers of cinema. But the Lumiere brothers were also pursuing the solution to an even more elusive problem: the deceptively difficult challenge of producing true colour photographs.
Throughout the 19th century, the search for colour photography was photography's holy grail. There were literally dozens of inventors, entrepreneurs trying to find a successful method of colour photography.
For 70 years, photographs like these had been elaborately hand-tinted because inventors had failed to find ways to capture the colour constituents of light. In 1861, the brilliant Scottish physicist James Clerk Maxwell had produced the first colour image by projecting 3 separate photographs of a tartan ribbon. The process was cumbersome and impractical. Inventors dreamt of a method for taking colour photographs that everyone could use. In 1907, the Lumiere brothers announced to the world that they'd found the answer. They'd discovered that it was possible to produce colour photographs by staining potato starch with 3 different dyes and applying the granules onto glass plates. The Lumiere brothers called them autochromes.
Each square inch of an autochrome plate is covered with about 4 million tiny transparent filters made from potato starch. So what you actually see is a colour image which is made up of millions of tiny red, green and blue dots.
The results were spectacular. As light shone through the glass plates, it revealed images of breathtaking beauty. Autochromes were luminous, ethereal, and dreamlike. They captured colour exquisitely. After so many years of frustration, it was a stunning technological breakthrough.
You have to prick yourself to realise that what you're looking at here is a scene which could be nearly 100 years old. There was still a sense of the miraculous, which almost sort of transcends what you would normally expect from a photograph. So they are captivating, magical images.
They chime in with the beginning of the century when everyone's hoping for new good things, and they seem to capture this kind of Edwardian period that's been called the Golden Summer, that whole period when the century had only just started.
Among both amateur and professional photographers worldwide, the invention of the autochrome generated immense and immediate excitement. The Lumiere brothers demonstrated the potential of their invention by shooting autochromes of members of their own family.
They're lovely. They're really sweet images, and it's always summer in autochromes, or it always seems to be. There's always this kind of golden haze, and the girls are always beautiful, and everyone's wearing red.
But there was a problem. At up to 6 times the price of black and white plates, autochromes were very expensive. In Britain, the technology attracted wealthy enthusiasts, such as Etheldreda Janet Lang, who revelled in their painterly quality. The new technology also appealed to members of Britain's banking dynasties. John Simon Warburg's private income enabled him to use autochromes to shoot beautiful images of the British seaside, from Margate to Cornwall.
He did these wonderful kind of grey, misty, very pale lilac-y blue images, which are very different from the golden, glowing summers.
The autochromes of John Warburg, I think, are a good example of how somebody who could see beyond the immediate possibilities of the process in terms of recording colour, but started to compose in colour. You would have a cow on the beach, where you get these wonderful interplay between the blue of the sky and the expanse of sand, with this white cow surrealistically standing in the middle of the frame.
Another banker, Lionel de Rothschild, shared this passion for colour. Exploiting his aristocratic connections, in 1909 he took this picture of King Edward VII, the earliest known colour photograph of a British monarch. There followed portraits of Lady Helen Vincent, a close friend of Winston Churchill, and Baron Brownlow, who later supported Edward and Mrs. Simpson during the abdication crisis. Back in Paris, Albert Kahn's employees were also quick to put the new technology to good use. As early as October 1908, one of Kahn's team had shot the first colour images of the American aviator Wilbur Wright, who'd been thrilling the French public by showing off his latest flying machine. And in May 1909, Kahn himself attended a magic lantern projection in Paris, which demonstrated the creative potential of autochromes. The show featured the work of Jules Gervais Courtenement, an Algerian-born photographer who'd taken his camera across North Africa and produced many intimate and vibrant images of life there. When he saw Courtenement's work, Kahn was convinced that the autochrome was the perfect medium for the photographic project that was now developing in his mind.
Algeria was France's first venture into a North African colony, and the French had been in Algeria since 1830.
By 1909, Algeria had become a playground for French travellers, who saw it as a safe yet exotic destination.
I think it's significant that Courtelement and Kahn seem to share objectives. They're both interested in preserving what they perceive as a disappearing world.
What the camera was seeing was real people doing real things in a way that they had done for centuries past.
Courtelement photographed women in the countryside making baskets, doing the laundry, and preparing staple foods such as couscous. He shot images of boys learning the Quran at school and girls making carpets for sale to the tourists. A big attraction for visitors were the exotic dancers of the Ouled Naïl. They were a semi-nomadic Berber people who lived in the Algerian desert. For centuries they'd been training their daughters to dance for money.
Legend has it that while doing this they were also prostitutes, but I think this is part of the salacious tourist mentality at work.
By the time Courtelement arrived, the Ouled Naïl were most commonly represented in risque postcards, but he showed them in a different light.
Courtelement is interesting because he's not playing into this Western fantasy of Algerian women. He has wide experience of the country, he speaks the language, and he has different levels of access and also different levels of understanding.
Two black and white photographs show how during the shoot, Courtelement directed the Ouled Naïl.
One gets a sense almost of a sort of collaborative photographic venture. You get a very strong sense that they're talking to each other, they're discussing poses, and they're arranging themselves for the camera.
Courtelement's pictures reveal how the Ouled Naïl adorned themselves with jewellery made from what they'd earned. Eventually, the Ouled Naïl's customs were suppressed, and they merged with the rest of the Algerian nomadic population. Today, their colourful costumes and profusion of jewellery would only be found in a museum. After Kahn saw Courtelemant's work, he bought some of the best pictures and used them as a template for his archive of the planet. Over the next 2 decades, the financier would send his own photographers around the world. Their aim was to create a visual inventory of everyday life before the pressures of the 20th century would destroy it, thereby promoting greater understanding of global and cultural diversity.
This ambition was founded on the very simple principle that learning to understand other cultures and people would help diminish the risk of conflict. So through his archives of the planet, Kahn brought the world here to show what everyday life was like elsewhere.
From voodoo practitioners in West Africa to salmon fishermen in Ireland, to children resting in Verona, and a game of chess played with human pieces at a temple festival in Vietnam. Albert Kahn's archive is a vivid portrait of the world's collective cultural life.
He believed that by documenting visually the world, it would help people develop a universal, a general knowledge, and therefore would foster peace.
I think there is something powerfully positivist about Kahn, that from vision can come the future. Only through the visual is it possible for pacifism to have a hold on the emotions of large numbers of people.
Albert Kahn named his extraordinary photographic project the Archive of the Planet. It would grow to become the most important collection of early color photography in the world.
This collection has never been put into the state that its creator wanted it to be. It's never had the public profile that its creator wanted it to have. It's like this extraordinary sculpture that has never been fully unveiled.
Each individual plate of glass has its own unique value. It's a little testament to real life as it was at the beginning of the 20th century.
Among the thousands of images, there are very few of Kahn himself. The man whose dream it was to capture the myriad faces of humanity always tried to elude the photographer's lens himself.
Such elusiveness presents us with a paradox. We only have around 10 images of the man who was responsible for what is the world's largest collection of early colour photographs. And most of these shots were taken surreptitiously by his cameramen.
I think it's rather touching when one sees these fleeting images of Kahn at the edge of his own photographs, one of his own cameramen who just manages surreptitiously to catch a shot of him. He was very self-effacing. He was the connecting spark that made things happen, but he didn't feel that he should be part of what was happening.
In June 1909, Kahn employed his first professional photographer. It was Auguste Léon who shot the first formally commissioned autochrome for Albert Kahn's Archive of the Planet. The picture, a street scene at the Rue de la Huchette in Paris, shows some of the limitations of the new process. The autochrome's long exposure times meant that anything moving in front of the lens would become a blur.
This colour image, which contains a group of people, is quite rare, because it's difficult to keep so many people still in front of the camera.
To capture reality, Kahn realized that as well as preserving life in colour, he'd need to catch the world in motion.
In its early stages, he seems to have been particularly interested in using film. They were filming life on the street. They were filming the social contemporary events of the day as though they were separate little parcels of history.
He had an almost mystical belief that the film camera would reveal aspects of reality if it was used in a particular way, if it was used to catch life unawares.
From the outset, Kahn wanted to let his cameras run and run, to capture the random flow of life. His photographers often adopted approaches of real ingenuity. For this shot taken along the Boulevard des Italiens, they mounted a hand-cranked camera in an open-top car. This cyclist enjoys a cigarette, oblivious to the gaze of the camera. Here, Kahn's cameraman records the human traffic frequenting a pissoir, one of the distinctive open-air urinals that line the streets of the city. The Parisians are unembarrassed by the unfamiliar presence of the camera.
There is this concentration and focus and interest on contemporary everyday life that is quite emphatic and quite new. This notion that, you know, the history of the future will be told from the perspective of the everyday life of today.
Kahn spared no expense in recording a world in transition. He sent cameramen back to the same spot in front of the Arc de Triomphe over and over again. In 1917, at the height of the war, women in mourning appear in the frame. By 1921, the pavements bustle with prams, evidence of the post-war baby boom. 2 years later, young women are sporting bobbed hair. By 1925, automobiles dominate the boulevards. Kahn's photographers would travel the world, but some of the most compelling footage in the archive is shot on his own doorstep.
It's not just an interest in national and racial others, but one could also argue that it's an interest in social others, and that there is a certain, you know, class dimension within what's going on here as well.
Kahn's films give us a rare insight into all aspects of French society in the early 20th century. Throughout history, the rural workers of Brittany had harvested seaweed along the coast of Finistère in western France. At the time this footage was shot in 1921, the practice was still widespread. It continued well into the 1950s.
It was used as fuel, as a kind of fertilizer, and as a medicinal source.
In 1928, another of Kahn's photographers, Camille Sauvageot, returned to Finistère. But this time, his cine camera was loaded with some very early colour film.
What we're seeing there is really what the cameraman shot on the spot. What we're not seeing, fortunately, and this is, I think, what makes it unique, is the film carefully trimmed and tailored to fit into a narrative.
Unlike the newsreels of the time, which were heavily edited, Kahn's footage was kept uncut. He wanted his films to be a historical record, so nothing was discarded. And every subject was worthy of scrutiny, even a sleepy fishing village in Brittany.
Like Kahn, the financiers in Europe and America, those who were concerned to transform the world, loved comforting images of an unchanging world. They loved peasants and what they presumed to be the traditional unchanging nature of a rural society, which was rapidly disappearing.
When Albert Kahn established his archive, he was aware that across the world many societies were likely to disappear forever. By the first decade of the 20th century, eminent writers had forecast the decline and eventual disappearance of many traditional cultures. Kahn knew he was in a race against time. By 1913, he was sending photographers all over the world. Only one of them was a woman. In May that year, Marguerite Mespoulet embarked on the Kahn Archive's only expedition to Ireland. She arrived in a critical period of Irish history, as Republicans were engaged in a bitter campaign to achieve Home Rule.
In one respect, it was a feeling of optimism. On the other hand, Ireland was anything but a country at peace in 1913. There would have been concern about the situation in Northern Ireland and the risk of civil war. These people are simply on the brink of what was to be a decade of violence out of which modern Ireland would be born.
Mespoulet was familiar with Irish culture. She'd studied Celtic history in one of France's most distinguished universities.
Mespoulet was a particularly brilliant student in the Sorbonne. Everything we know about Mespoulet suggests that she had a very strong presence, a very strong personality. And I think that when she came to Ireland, well, she brought that personality with her.
Mespoulet was intrigued by rumours suggesting that a pure Celtic community survived in the far west of Ireland.
What is interesting is that in the vision of cultural nationalism which the photographers had, there's a desire to find the original Celtic stock.
On the outskirts of Galway city, she visited a fishing village called the Claddagh. Its existence could be traced back to before the 7th century. By 1913, this haphazard collection of 200 tiny thatched cottages was home to one of Ireland's last remaining Celtic communities.
It was a little outpost left of the Celtic world, where people spoke a strange language and had their own ways, with its own little king, in the heart of, we'll say, the United Kingdom.
Throughout her 3-week journey, Marguerite Mespoulet kept a diary.
Although we were initially struck by just how poor and dirty the inhabitants of the Claddagh were, some of them lived fairly happily.
The Claddagh was in serious decline. The pictures will show grass growing, they will show the people in very bad dress even, because the wealth was gone from the Claddagh. There was no electricity at all. They had no running water as such, they had their own wells.
And the well was the village meeting point, where the women of the Claddagh would clean their fish. Mespoulet captured the Claddagh women so clearly that they can be readily recognised today.
In that picture of the two women at the pump cleaning fish, one is my grandmother, Nantu. They're cleaning fish. They were just there doing their job when the two French women happened on them. And then over a 3-day period, they posed with my grandmother's shawls. And from what I've been told, they received 5 shillings.
The people of the Claddagh made their living from fishing. When the men returned from sea, the women would sell the catch in Galway City's Fish Market Square.
Oftentimes they used to have the baskets on their heads, they'd bring them over. I remember as a kid growing up here, I remember the Claddagh people shouting, fresh fish, early in the morning, and they used to have the little skib, as it was called, on their head. The women literally ran the village because they had access to the money. When they sold the fish, they had, if you like, the revenue literally in their pocket.
These women are some of the wildest that you could meet. We had to use gentleness and cunning in order to get them to stay still for 8 to 10 seconds in front of the camera lens.
They would have been maybe shy of the camera. To pose for a photograph, they might have found it funny, or, you know, they were shy. That's what they were.
This picture, painted in 1841 by the Irish artist Frederick Burton, is thought to be set in a cladder cottage. Artists have long been captivated by the vivid red clothes worn by women in the west of Ireland. It was a colour that Mess Poulet wanted to preserve in her autochromes.
We were very fortunate to get hold of a rare example of this very beautiful costume.
The colour itself is so extraordinary. You know, it kind of sucks you into it. It's not just red, it's not just crimson, it's not just the colour of blood, it's all of that together. And here you have these peasant women in the west of Ireland having no problem at all wearing the most extraordinary kind of hallucinating colour.
The young girl who posed for these photographs is regarded in Galway as one of the most perfect examples of an Irish colleen.
The perfect Irish colleen in Mess Poulet's picture was 14-year-old Mian Kenny.
Mian was my grandmother's eldest daughter, and she went everywhere with my grandmother and worked with her as well. I remember being a fine lump of a woman, very strong. Mian was the kind of woman who liked a laugh and to kid around, and she was just a very, very jolly woman.
For centuries, the fishermen of the Cladder had used traditional wooden boats. But by 1913, they were being forced out of business by modern trawlers. The livelihood of the villagers was under threat. Within a few years, Galway city would be modernised, and the thatched cottages of the Cladder would be deemed unfit for human habitation. By the mid-1930s, they'd been torn down and replaced by council houses.
When they started to demolish the Cladder, they eradicated a way of life that went back possibly to Celtic times and even further. I think these photographs are very important because they show the beginning of the end of a once proud colony, a way of life that disappeared within 2 decades. And I think Ireland is the poorer for that.
Marguerite Mess Poulet travelled on through the county of Galway. She committed to her diary poignant descriptions of the people she found there.
This woman makes her living as a fringe maker. It takes her 3 days to make each one. If I didn't have to look after the nippers, she said, I could perhaps do one every 2 days. But there are 7 children in the house.
The gaunt faces of the women who, by their own admission, have too many children and too much work, that's brought out in colour. Couldn't be brought out in black and white.
As Mess Poulet discovered, poor communities enduring such difficult conditions were particularly prone to disease.
A little to the north of the place where this house was photographed, people are dying like flies of typhoid fever.
For many decades, Ireland's population had been in steep decline. About 1 million people had died during the potato famine of the 1840s. Mass migration had robbed the country of up to 2 million more.
There is hardly a single village where you don't find several of these mournful skeletons of little grey houses, taken over by nettles.
The shots of the empty houses are, I think, moving testimony to the continued scourge of emigration in Ireland.
At the start of the 20th century, emigration was such a fact of life. It was everywhere, and particularly from the west of Ireland.
Throughout her Irish odyssey, Mess Poulet met people who were about to plunge into a period of great uncertainty.
The part of the photo that really intrigues me is the little boy. Here's a little boy holding on to his father for security in a world that was about to be blown apart. And I wonder about somebody like that in 1913. He looks like a little boy of maybe 6 or 7. What happened to him later? You know, did he survive the various wars, the various political catastrophes? Did he emigrate like so many of the people from that community would have done?
For those who decided to stay, prospects were bleak. Many were forced to take back-breaking work on the land, including peat digging.
Even when they're cutting turf and so on, she says, these people speak like poets. So there's a kind of nobility. These are noble people.
He works alone, under the sky, his feet in water, with just the birds and the clouds for company. It's easy to understand how these people have such vivid and passionate imaginations, and were able to construct the most beautiful legends in the whole of Europe.
Mess Poulet's 73 autochromes were among the earliest known colour photographs of Ireland. When she returned to France, they were added to Kahn's Archive of the Planet.
Kahn himself must have been extremely pleased with these images because the images and the diary fit exactly into his ambition, which was to show people how people lived elsewhere, that dignity and nobility could be found in the most surprising places.
Nine weeks after Mess Poulet returned, Albert Kahn sent another mission to the British Isles. At the end of the summer of 1913, he travelled to Cornwall in the company of one of his photographers, Auguste Léon, on a trip that combined business and pleasure. At the time, the north coast of Cornwall was about to become a popular tourist destination. But Kahn had already bought a holiday home there, a seafront villa at Carbis Bay near St Ives. There, Léon photographed some of Kahn's guests on the lawn overlooking the bay.
He became fascinated by the Cornish landscape and by the coast. I think that Kahn clearly saw that this was something which could become a centre of tourism, a desirable location in the future.
Business reasons might also explain Kahn's decision to acquire a home in Cornwall.
For a man who was an expert in mining, given the revival of Cornish tin mining in the years before the First World War, it would be perfectly logical for him to have a speculative interest in acquiring a Cornish tin mine.
But in 1913, the main purpose of the trip was to photograph the people of Cornwall. Just down the road from Carbis Bay, Léon encountered women selling mineral water to tourists who were exploring the coastline. The source of the mineral water is still there, but much of what Léon shot has long since disappeared. He also witnessed a boy leading a donkey to work, a farmer posing at his paddock, women and children in their Sunday best, and a young man resting on an aqueduct that drains water from a tin mine.
The great excitement of discovering the autochromes is that these are not only the first colour photographs of any kind, as far as we know, ever taken in Cornwall. They are very high quality. Along with everything else, it marks out Kahn as a pioneer, a philosopher.
During the summer months, the people of Cornwall worked the land, using workhorses and hay wains.
It was a kind of willful, nostalgic view of the landscape. This was something that they knew industry, progress was going to change, and they were going to lose it.
With the demise of mining in the latter part of the 19th century, the importance of the small farmer, of a kind of peasantry, of smallholding farming, was the mainstay of the Cornish economy, and I think that that is represented in this photograph.
Along the coast at St Ives, Léon found a town that for centuries had relied on fishing. But by 1913, the once plentiful stocks of pilchards were already in decline. In the back streets, houses were becoming run down, and children often went barefoot. Today, these cottages sell to holidaymakers for up to £500,000. Most of the people who appeared in Léon's Cornish autochromes are long gone, including the ancestors of one-time resident George Farrell.
The lady in it is my grandmother. The house that she's standing in was originally an old inn called the Labour in Vain. Quite an historic pub in his time. Apart from that, I suppose it was like a lot of pubs. I suppose he'd done a bit of smuggling on the side. Everybody did in Cornwall. What they call free trade in Cornwall, yeah. The lintel over the door was ship's timber. And a lot of houses in St Ives were built of wrecked timber as well, yeah. In those days, they never left anything go to waste, you know.
The sea gave a livelihood to many Cornish families, but its support was fickle, and it offered a perilous life.
When you look at that old salt leaning against the wall, I mean, he's perfectly happy and he's there in his retirement, but so many of his contemporaries would have been lost at sea. There were disasters all the time.
On the south coast of Cornwall, Léon visited another important fishing town, Newlyn.
Here, people were still living their lives very much in the same way that they had for centuries, which Albert Kahn would have known was passing.
Léon's autochromes include scenes that had also inspired the Newlyn artists, who were painting in the town at the end of the 19th century.
The Kahn photographs are beautiful. They're very painterly in their approach, I feel. They're building on this idealised view and capturing that in the photographs in that same sort of style as the Newlyn painters of the previous generation.
Léon's pictures provide a glimpse of Cornwall before the last peaceful chapters of the Edwardian era came to an abrupt and violent end.
1913 is a year that always makes you think, what happened next? Because we know, we have the benefit of hindsight. So you can't help but look at some of those young people and think, I wonder.
At the end of August 1913, Kahn and Léon left Cornwall and headed for France. But just 2 days later, Léon boarded a boat train and returned to Britain. This time he was heading for London to record life in the capital of the British Empire.
It's the splendour, the majesty of Edwardian London as the centre of empire which is predominant. He photographed the Palace of Westminster, this wonderful Gothic edifice which represented the mother of the parliaments. He photographed the royal courts of justice, so that the rule of law was also part of what the empire was seen as standing for.
Outside Buckingham Palace, the memorial to Queen Victoria was just 2 years old. It features a gilded representation of Victory, which tops a white marble statue of Victoria herself, surrounded by the angels of charity, truth, and justice.
This isn't just any statue of Queen Victoria. This is the memorial which is to commemorate the life of the Queen Empress, the person under whom the British Empire had, in effect, been created in its modern form.
London was still a city of heavy industry. The smog from its factories and the bustle on its streets dictated when and where Leon could shoot his autochromes.
If people did move whilst you were taking the exposure, you would end up with a ghostly shadow image. So what you would have to do is perhaps work early in the morning when the streets were quiet.
Below St Paul's, Ludgate Hill may look empty, but those ghostly smears are Londoners rushing to work.
These images with blurring are relatively rare in the collection. The photographers avoided them. But today they have a particular value because they show us the challenges the photographers faced.
In the years ahead, the lives of the Britons in Leon's autochromes would be shattered by war, upheaval, and loss. His pictures capture in colour a world that would never be the same again.
With hindsight, when you look at these photographs, there's always an air of poignancy where you realise that what we're looking at here is the final glowing embers, as it were, of British society before the First World War. And you have to wonder, in a few years' time, what happened to these people, what happened to their friends and relatives. And certainly it was a world that was to disappear forever in the mud of France.
For more than 2 decades, Kahn's films and autochromes would chronicle the changing life and volatile times of peoples all over the world.
It is a multimedia archive. We see this tension between the direct ability to capture movement and motion within the film and the more static, the more sort of aesthetic dimensions of the autochrome collection.
What I think we find in Kahn's collection is a unique moment when both photography and cinematography could have the capacity to reach a world that is in process of vanishing in front of our eyes.
It's a unique testimony, and the more time passes, the more important the testimony becomes.
Together, Kahn and his photographers created one of the world's most important visual archives. The images they produced offer us unique insights into the vital, formative years of the 20th century. Kahn's Archive of the Planet is a storehouse of images that celebrates humanity in all its diversity. Its films capture fleeting moments from a lost age. And its astonishing photographs allow us to glimpse lives lived a century ago, all over the world, in radiant colour.
The Edwardian comic masterpiece that sparked a lifestyle revolution. The Edwardian season continues on BBC4 with The Real Mr. Pooter, Monday at 9. A little taster up next.